Welcome back, everybody, to the Transcending Humanity podcast. We are really excited to bring you a special guest today, Leo Caldwell. We'll get to his introduction in just a moment, but I want to cover the topic that we're going to talk about, right? Being trans in the workplace is difficult, and while some improvements have been made in corporate America, there's still a long way to go to get to even close to equitable treatment. While people in the workplace are more tolerant, there's still not enough of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. Knowledge of how to care for and support equitable workplaces for trans people is pretty thin on the ground in most places. We feel far less supported in the workplace and have a harder time navigating culture and find it hard to get a promotion. I'm going to throw a couple stats at you all. Trans people are 2 times as likely to be unemployed. We are generally make 32% less than cisgendered people. More than 50% of us feel uncomfortable being out in the workplace. 25% of transgender people have lost a job due to bias around their gender identity. 75% plus have experienced some form of workplace discrimination, such as refusal to hire practices, privacy violations, harassment, physical and sexual violence on the job. And those rates skyrocket if you are a trans person of color. Which brings me to Leo. We're going to talk about trans equity in the workplace. But first, I would love for Leo to introduce himself to you all.
Thanks for having me, Erica. I'm happy to be here. I've been following along as you all are recording and excited to be a part of the actual podcast. So my background is in journalism. I spent 6 years in newspaper newsrooms, and then I actually spent 6 years in the corporate training world, working for like a small family-owned agency, and we worked with pharmaceutical companies, we worked with manufacturing companies, and then I moved over to a larger organization that worked with like Delta, and we just built all this corporate training. So I started seeing really what you're talking about, a lot of inequity around LGBTQ plus employees, and realizing not only inequity, but people just didn't even know how to talk about it in the workplace, right? They were just like, I don't want to touch that subject, especially trans folks. And so taking journalism background, taking my lived experience, taking my training background, I started doing, I call it training, but it's not training. I get to give presentations. I get to go into organizations, usually for an hour. I would love if they did actual training, but it's usually just me coming to talk for an hour. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about my professional background. I transitioned 16 years ago, socially, yeah, and then medically, over a period of 5 years after that, I did some transition related care. So I've been out in trans, for quite a while, but I wasn't out in the workplace until 7 or 8 years into transition. I did not come out. So, and that was on purpose because I heard a lot of transphobic stuff in the workplace, especially in a newspaper newsroom. It was not a very warm, welcoming place to be. And now I teach in higher ed, and I teach in the journalism department at Ball State, and I do some, like I said, training. Yeah, and I just recently joined a nonprofit called the Research Institute for Therapeutics. The Research Institute of Gender Therapeutics. I just butchered the name. But we're seeking an FDA-approved treatment for gender dysphoria, which is a big deal because FDA approval has some preemptions to it that could offer some protections for the state bans going on. And those are my dogs, and we're going to hear them probably a lot because that's what they do. Normally they're asleep right now, but whenever I do a call or a talk, they're like, yes, I will talk as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I have 2 dogs, obviously, and I just try to do some work around the trans community, but also I do other things, and have different jobs, too many jobs right now.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I'm kind of in the same boat in terms of feeling like I have too many jobs between my gay job and my day job, right? By the way, what are your dogs' names?
Oliver and North.
Oliver and North. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of this topic. I laid it out above, but I would really love your take on why trans equity is so important, kind of lay the groundwork for us to have, a broader conversation.
Yeah, so I think it's so important because the thing is, when trans people are in the workplace, we're breaking down kind of gender norms, I feel like, and I feel like we're challenging some of the gender inequity that already exists. We talk about the wage gap with women. And I think that when we start to think about gender less as a binary, and some trans people do fit into that binary, and that's great, but oftentimes we challenge that binary. And I think
Hmm.
anytime we're challenging the gender binary, that's not a bad thing for the workplace.
Yeah.
I think offers more conversations around inequity. I think, personally, all the trans people I know are really hard workers, really, I mean, the work we've had to do to be ourselves translates into the workplace in a lot of ways. And I think that we're such valuable assets as far as perspective taking too. Especially like those of us that did have, an experience as one gender in the workplace in transition, we can offer those perspectives. And I think that providing us with equity, one, you're going to attract us to your company. And I think we're great employees, like I said. Two, I think it offers a space for the bigger topics about gender.
Yeah. I I love one of the things that you spoke about there in that, it's what we have to offer, particularly as individuals. That experience actually leads to some things that businesses can lack. I know that when I was not Erica before, I was a good employee. I was a high performer. I, worked for quite a few large companies, and afterwards, some opinions changed, really for no reason I could point to, right? And the thing that has blown my mind at time is everything that I put on the table before is still there. And in fact, it's actually been enhanced. My ability to connect to people, to bring the human to whatever we're working on, is far better than it was before. And I was already pretty darn good at it. Right. So, I it's it's a wild proposition to feel like who people see me as lessens my value to the company when I'm actually providing more,
Yeah, and
right?
I, saw the flip, right, of here I was a woman in the workplace, especially I was a butch, lesbian in the workplace. And the climate was not great. I would speak up, and oftentimes I felt like folks weren't hearing me or talking over
Mm-hmm.
me. I transitioned. So as a woman, I was in the workplace like 5 years, I believe. Yeah. And so then when I transitioned, within a year, I was promoted twice. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm the same employee. Nothing has changed. I mean, to your point, what has changed is I'm more comfortable now. So I
Mm-hmm.
offer more connection, more warmth, probably because I was pretty isolated at work before because I didn't really want to talk to people about my personal life. But then I get all
Yeah.
these promotions. I'm like, yo, I have the same skill set. Like this is wild. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we again offer that lens, and I think we are able to highlight some gaps and some weak points when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
inclusion, not just
Yeah,
about trans and LGBTQ folks, but just in general, because we've lived that experience.
totally. And I can say for me, I've certainly had my own lived experience with this, and I got to say, disclaimer, I've done pretty well,
Yeah.
right? Um, there are people that I know from all over the place that really struggle much more than I do, and I think especially our non-binary siblings really have even potentially more issues at play with equity because um, people really seem to struggle with how they should deal with non-binary people more than trans people, I think, in ways. So I always want to call out like some of our siblings struggle in different ways than maybe you or I do, right? um, so how do we make the case that trans equity, and frankly obviously equity in general, is a good business proposition for our companies?
Yeah, and obviously it's about the dollar, right? And oftentimes, like things don't change unless they're going to affect profits or affect margins. And one of the things that I've struggled with is what's the return on investment, right? Why care?
Yeah.
Why do this? And the thing I always point to is Generation Z, and not that all of us don't matter, like I think all generations matter, but Generation
Hmm.
Z is extremely gender diverse, and they are already in the workplace and their expectations are different. I think that I'm an elder millennial, and as an elder millennial, like we kind of were like, okay, we want to change the world, but we're not going to push too hard, and we're going to still follow the rules. And I don't think Generation Z are going to do that. They're really going to transform the workplace. And so
Yeah.
my argument for more inclusion of all genders and gender diversity is this push of like these people are going to be in your workplace and they're going to call for this
Hmm.
change, or you're not going to attract them, and it's going to cost you either to replace them, or it's going to cost you because you're not going to attract top talent because that's the expectation. And I mean, yeah, I would like to argue not about the dollars and say it just makes good sense in practice. When you have employees that are mentally well in your workplace, they're going to perform at higher functioning levels than if they are
Hmm.
struggling and feeling like excluded. But I think we talk a lot about mental health, but I don't think we've seen really in practice in the workplace. It's rare to see people really be
Hmm.
supportive of mental health in the workplace.
Totally. I'm going to out myself here, a Gen Xer, right? So I'm
I'm on the cusp,
totally
so I love a
on
Gen
the
X.
cusp.
So.
Okay, great. Awesome. Um, a cranky, no, I'm not really a cranky Gen Xer, but that's kind of how we think of ourselves these days, those disaffected latchkey kids that had to let themselves in from school, right? Um, I think there's a lot that we put on the table, but I really have enjoyed seeing our Gen Z and millennial people come along and drive so much change. We drove change in our day, and it's continuing to happen, right? And I think it's incredibly valuable. It's incredibly wonderful to see the gender diversity that you were talking about that's now on the table. Like, no matter what's going on right now, we are going to get to a certain point of time when it's just not feasible
Yeah.
for companies to ignore it, right? That's coming one way or the other.
Mhm.
Make a fuss about it now, but it's
Mhm.
coming because that's what the workforce is looking like, especially as people feel so enabled and empowered to identify themselves as who they feel their most authentic version of, right? Um, I was thinking about uh, a couple of things that I hear that I always love to sort of put on the table, right? And it's because I show up, right? Because I'm visibly transgender, right? I don't pass as female. I frankly don't pass as male anymore either. I'm kind of in that in between state, and at 6 feet tall, just about, and 230 pounds, and no longer a competitive swimmer, I'm always going to be a big person that takes up space. So when I'm walking everywhere I go, in town, at conferences, public speaking, at work, I'm very noticeable, right? And that used to really bother me. But as I got comfortable with myself, I saw it as, look, this is me being present with people. This is me showing people how trans people are normal and how we can deliver on good business, how we can deliver as good neighbors and friends and patrons of stores and restaurants, right? I am probably the first trans person these people are interacting with. I am one of two or three on my campus at work that has about 5,000 people of a very large company, and probably the most visible, right? And for me, being visible helps people realize that they can do it themselves. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people come up to me, not heard, have had people come up to me and say, I can finally be myself because of you. No matter what it is, whether that's you're queer or trans or non-binary, or you want to talk about other things that affected you in your life. And when I went through my initial transition process, I was very open about mental health and how that drove this for me. And it's amazing how much that opened so many doors for other people to have those conversations, right? So just kind of love your thoughts on how we can show up and what we can drive and how we can normalize that your true gender, while a personal factor in how you go through the world, doesn't really describe who you are or your value.
Yeah, yeah, and as you're talking, one thing you were talking about folks that don't pass, right? And I obviously pass, and that's something I'm really conscious about. But whenever I see someone that's like not passing, it's like also kind of a relief to me, like, oh, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
this like safety, right? And so it's like I know for that person it can be unsafe to not pass. But in what you're saying, it offers almost like a beacon of like we exist and we're here. And I don't want to say that we're like normal because I don't like the word normal, but we exist, we're here, we have lives like
Mm-hmm.
you, we're humans, right? And when I see someone that doesn't pass as a trans person, I'm like, phew, thank God, there's more of us and we're all
Mhm.
around.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really awesome, and I think that's something that we don't, because a lot of times not passing is such a negative thing, right? And I
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
it's nice to like reframe it, and think of it. And I know there's a lot of risk in it, so like reframing it also can be dangerous. But I think that in a lot of ways it can be empowering. And it, like to your point, I think it empowers people, not just trans folks or people to come out as LGBTQ plus, but it empowers people to be like, you know what? I wanted to look this way today, and I chose to wear this outfit instead, and like
Yeah.
I just be myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Just me being around gives people permission to do that, right? And it's amazing. And I just always have to say when I make that statement, like I'm proud of who I am and the way I look. For me, passing is not important. And that's not true for everybody. I love our siblings that do pass and care about that. This isn't devaluing you at all. And I know some of our siblings really struggle with that, and it drives some mental health issues for them as well. It did for me initially at first, but then I got to know myself and I got comfortable. It became for me a badge of pride. So what I say is I pass as transgender and I am perfectly fine
Yeah.
for that. And I celebrate wherever anybody is
Mhm.
on that journey, whether you do pass or you don't and you want to, or you're happy with where you are. Like you know, we always have to state that being trans is really only important to you, the individual, and be yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
So
And I actually don't intend to pass. Like I just have, and that's actually there's a lot of conversation in the trans male community. It's really isolating to pass. Like I go into a gay
yeah.
club and I get not kicked out, but I've gotten refused service. And I'm like, I'm trans. And they're like, oh, your eyebrows look too good. I thought something was up. It's like, thanks. Like, and so
Eyebrows do look good.
yeah. So I just feel like, Pat, to your point, like everybody's journey is unique, as we all know, but for even passing trans people, sometimes the intention wasn't, it just, I mean, hormones did what they did to me. And
Hmm.
now I'm here and I'm like, I don't know how to look more trans or more queer, like what can I do? Because like I have a certain style that I like, and
Hmm.
that's why actually I got my right ear pierced because like, what's the gay ear? Like, what can
It's
I
the gayer.
do?
It's the right one. Or actually,
Yeah.
it's this one.
Yeah. So I totally, yeah, I totally hear you. And I'm also like everybody's on their own journey. And I do understand too that, there's privileges and safety in
Mhm.
passing for me. And I have recognized
Sure.
that. And when I was a butch lesbian, when I went out into the world, it was much different, right? And now
Yeah.
passing as a straight man, yeah, like I can sense that difference. Talking about in the workplace, but also talking about in the larger world. Like if I don't
Yeah.
have to come out, I mean,
Mhm.
if I don't want to come out, I don't have to come out.
Yeah. I totally get that. And as someone who lives in the DC area, right? I live in a very friendly area. So I generally feel very safe in my transits. There are places that I don't go. There are places that I feel uncomfortable. There are situations that I do feel uncomfortable in. But I also have to acknowledge the privilege I have as someone who has a job in tech, who's doing really well, that lives in a blue city that is very one of the gayest cities in the United States, right? There's that privilege that I have. And the way I go through the world works for me, but also my environment supports that. And I recognize that's not true for everybody.
Mhm.
Me living in South Carolina or Florida or Texas could be quite dangerous for me, but I
Right.
don't experience that to that anywhere near that degree here in DC.
Yeah. Yeah. You all just made Aaron Reed's list of like top 5 places to live in the US.
Yeah, yes, it is very nice here.
Yeah.
Okay, and we love Aaron Reed. Aaron,
Yes.
watch. Um, okay, um, so if we're going to talk, talking about trans equity, right? And I think it goes hand in hand with just general LGBTQ plus equity, right? And I think a lot of companies are like, oh, we did something for Pride.
Yeah.
We're a good company. We're equitable. We did the thing, right? I would love to hear your take on is Pride Month enough? Because I certainly have some of my own opinions, but we're here to hear yours.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was saying earlier. A lot of people will invite me in to talk, but it's like I am the trans conversation for like the year, and it's
Right.
60 minutes. And so I usually the first thing I ask is like, where's your company at right now? What do you think the climate
Hmm.
is amongst your employees? Like, do you feel like a lot of folks are just they're not educated, but they could, be educated and allies and be really inclusive? Do you think they're actively anti-trans? Where are they at? And I'm like, just,
Hmm.
60 minutes is enough for us to like get the allies excited and maybe do some education with the folks that are, just don't know what's up. Um,
Hmm.
it's absolutely not enough. And every time I would say when I'm usually in person somewhere, there's usually a conversation with an employee that either has transitioned or is going to transition. It hasn't happened every time, but several times this has happened. And I can, they share with me that it's not great. Things aren't great there. So here I am to speak to
Hmm.
this organization about how to be inclusive of trans employees for the 60 minutes, when the reality is, I think personally, it's not just obviously bringing speakers in, but it's working with a consultant, right? And bringing someone in
Hmm.
and working with your leadership team for them to, I think that's the first step is who's your leadership team. I think I'm actually probably jumping. I think we're going to talk about like practical applied things, but
Or
um,
that.
the leadership team, that's who drives culture a lot of times. And I think that's a lot of the things I have seen out in the world in
Mhm.
the corporate America is that there's leadership that doesn't get it, and they want to be inclusive, or they want to at least appear inclusive, so they bring in a speaker, or they do a pride, a rainbow logo for the month, and it's like that I think that's really where it starts, but it requires the work, it requires time, it requires money,
Mhm.
it requires effort, and I don't you don't get that just in Pride Month.
No, you don't. It's we're prideful all year long. It's still basically pride for us, even though it's not June. I'm still trans today. I'm still queer today, and I will be June 1st next year. Right.
Mhm.
Um, how was okay, we're going off script here a little bit. I felt like this pride was super heavy. And I was busy doing my own things, and it felt like this one was more loaded, more was on the line. And I know we're off the cuff here, but kind of would love your position on where you were with it, how you got through that, maybe what some of your talking points might have been.
Yeah, so I mean, we all know it's been an awful year, right, with legislation. And to your point, things have felt loaded. It's like I feel like corporations and organizations are in this weird position of like wanting to do this work, but then being really afraid to not do enough. So if they do a little,
Yeah.
then they're in this position of like, I only did this, and I'm afraid now I'm going to get attacked by the community, right?
Yeah.
And so I personally, I mean, again, we talked about age here. I'm 40, so I'm not ancient, but like I've been around long enough to remember a time when, I didn't see pride things at Target. I didn't see a lot
Yeah.
of visibility around the queer community. And of course they're profiting off of us. That's what they do. That's what businesses do. They profit off of people. Like that's that's the point. That's unfortunately we're in a capitalist society, right? And
Hmm.
so for me, there was this like initial, like, oh, not just this year, but over the years being like, oh gosh, look, there's pride stuff. Cool. Like this like feeling of yay, because I didn't see it before. But I have started to get resentful, especially with the Target thing, them taking things and moving
Yeah.
things back in the store. And I want employees to be safe and all that as well. I mean, like what's a livable wage? Is Target paying that? I don't know. I don't want like those employees to like put themselves on the line and face bigots. So I just really struggled with what can I be excited about? Like I don't
Yeah.
know.
Uh,
I don't know anymore. And I don't, it feels, like the Bud Light thing. Like, and
hmm.
I'm just like, every time we turn around, it's like we have some organization trying to do something like and show us some sort of recognition, and then something crazy happens, and either they pull it back or we get attacked. And so it's like it's the double-edged sword of visibility, I guess. And then as far as like
Yeah.
when I go into places, I feel like the big talking points this year was the legislation, because it's interesting to
Hmm.
me, especially from a journalistic background, to see the lack of coverage. Like this is a really, really
Yeah.
big deal. And we are a small percent of the population. So why is there so much the balance, right? If we just looked at like statistically, we're so small a portion of America. Why is there so much targeted at us? I mean, obviously it's like political theater. We're being used as a tool.
Right.
That sucks. Let's talk about it. Like, let's see that in the news. Let's see that broken down. And like we mentioned, Aaron Reed, Aaron's the only person I've seen really
Hmm.
create comprehensive coverage of what's happening with the trans stuff. And yeah, I don't know. It has been a hard year. I mean, for me personally, it's been a hard year. So add that on top of just like
Right.
this has been a hard, awful year. And I'm exhausted. Like I was excited to do the talks I did this year, and I was really grateful to be invited in person, which I think is important to put me in front of people. But I was like, this is a hard year to get up in front of people, you know, and I said that. I started every talk that way. Like, this is a
Hmm.
really hard year and we really, really need action. We don't need you just to sit here, you know? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how it's felt.
Very similar experiences, right? Like watching things go down with Bud Light and then Target and there's some news, there's some other places coming out that's like, oh come on, man.
Right.
Now, like you don't cave to bullies. Now, a small vocal minority, right? And I don't think there was a talk that I did where I didn't talk about the legislation. Um, there was one where I spent 5 minutes just naming all 24 states one by one. And I held that captive audience for that, right? And I wanted to relay the gravity, right? I think that's really come through in everything I've talked about. I've seen it through a lot of what you said, some of our other hosts have said, some of the people that we have yet to have on the podcast. And it was a hard one. It really was. And I went through the first half of the month really excited about what I had on my plate. And as I got to the second half of the month, I was really kind of feeling the weight because I had to talk about it a lot to a lot of people. And it just kind of, and I came out of Pride Month. My last thing that I did was literally the last day of the month. I had two things back to back on the 28th and the 30th. And I was exhausted all last weekend. And, I got to say, coming into the 4th of July, I wasn't feeling all of that patriotic
Right.
or freedomy, right? I really didn't celebrate yesterday. And not that it's been a huge holiday for me, but it's taken me a couple of days to get kind of through this malaise. And it's like talking to you, talking to people like Vanessa or Liam Pascal, and like getting with my siblings. And this fight was never about just this month. This is the month that we're just on the stage the most, right? We have to pace ourselves, we have to recharge. And I'm feeling more and more ready for what's next.
Mhm.
But it feels like the gravity has changed. And I don't know when it will change back. Right. So I just wanted to call it out because we're like hot off the heels of Pride. And I suspect many people are feeling the way that you and I feel. Right.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it was like a party where someone pooped in the pool, and now we're just like looking at it after where all the
Yes.
streamers are down and the poop is still there, and we're
It's
just like,
still
it's
there.
not. Yeah, it was a hard month. It was not. It was really, it's been hard for years here. I mean, for a long
Sure.
time, it's been hard, but like we've been really visible and like in this like legislative spotlight for a couple of years now. But this year was just like awful. It just felt devastating, and it was like weird to try to be recognized in that as well. And I think that yeah, just
Yeah.
didn't feel great. And I'm the same way. I did not celebrate. I love 4th of July, not because of what it means. I just love fireworks, and I grew up with fireworks.
Hmm.
I grew up a hillbilly, so like that's like
Yeah.
we were fighting the bottle rockets out of our hands, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I was like, I don't feel any connection to the country at all, and just struggling with that. And what does that mean? And what does it mean to be American? And like it's not,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard right now.
It's hard. Yeah, definitely. We have some similar backgrounds in terms of fireworks, right? But I do have all my fingers
Yeah,
still.
same.
Okay, so let's get into like the really next one, and I kind of expect this to be really the meat of the conversation, right? So, when do we start that process of creating an equitable workplace? Is it getting beyond Pride being a 1 day a year or maybe a monthly celebration? Um, how do we get that going? And I think some of the people that might watch this might be part of big companies and like, oh, we pretty robust thing, but there's always room to improve. There's always room to do more, and especially when we think about the intersectionality of all marginalized communities. But I think a lot of the need is where there's nothing. There's little to no representation. So, um, where would you recommend people start?
Yeah, well, and I think I lean mostly on my training background, and we did a lot of training around change. And really, this is just a big cultural shift and change
Yeah.
in the workplace. And so, what does that look like? obviously it isn't. It's like I was saying earlier, it's not a 60-minute conversation once a year. You're not going to shift culture and change things.
Hmm.
And I think that what's been discouraging to see is a lot of DEI positions getting, shut down, and we're seeing
Hmm.
a lot of the work around racism really start to ramp down, and that's what only been like really ramped up in 2020. And so
Yep.
that's 3 years, and I'm sure cultures didn't change, and that's the thing. It's a decade over decade, really,
Yeah.
thing. But I think it starts with, investing. Like I said, I think that no matter the size of the organization, someone's leading that organization, whether it's a team leading it, whether it's one person, and if that person is still either ignorant on the issues or struggling with the issues in any sort of like moral values way. I had a CEO once that was Christian and really just struggled to understand how you could be Christian and be inclusive of LGBTQ folks. And I'm like, that's possible, actually. Let
Very
me,
possible.
yeah,
Quite a few people are.
yeah, yes. And so that I saw that as like, no matter what changes amongst my colleagues, if this
Hmm.
one person's voice gets to be heard every month on this, like this, he did this little podcast thing that we all had to listen to, I'm like, then there's no way this is going to change. So I think, I hate to be like trickle down, but like it really does start at the top. It starts at the top. And if the top has not, isn't culturally competent about trans people, then you're screwed. And I think that's really where it starts. And if they're unwilling to, and there's a power to there's the power to be that could remove them, they should be removed from leadership. So then I think from there, it's, really, I think there's a lot of misinformation about trans people. Some basic
Totally.
education goes a long way. I think there are folks that, especially with the anti-trans legislation, a lot of the messaging around that is really misinformed. It's really scary.
Hmm.
It's made us out to be really kind of terrifying and gross, right? And so I think just basic education, what does it mean? Who are these people, right? I think it goes a long way with just the whole workplace population, but specifically for trans people, I think, anti-discrimination policies that call out gender identity. I think
Right.
access to spaces that aren't super gendered, like we were talking about, folks that don't identify with either gender, the bathroom becomes a big problem at the workplace, and it's not that hard. I don't think it's that hard to make more inclusive bathrooms. So what? There's a urinal in there. I hear that a lot. Like, oh, but there's urinals. So what? Like, it's not like a big deal. And I just think
Hmm.
that the bathroom stuff kills me. But yeah, just creating policies around transitioning, right? Like, what does this mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
I have clients, how do I introduce myself? How are we doing this? How are we rolling this out, right? And so I think that would be great just for trans people. But I think to really shift equity, it's like I said, leadership has to get on board, has to be educated. It's like a cultural competency thing. Like,
Yeah.
where's our company at with trans culture? Are they just totally majority don't know anything? Are they in the middle? Are they allies? Are they really anti-trans? And then that's a
Yeah.
huge problem. I don't know.
Yes.
Then you just lay everybody off and you start over. Like, I don't know
You
what you
change
do.
the tone. You
Yeah,
change the tone, right?
yeah, you have to. Yeah, yeah.
So I didn't think I would get to show off my master's degree, but I get to because you brought up something that is one of my favorite topics to talk about when I'm not talking about being trans, right? And that's change initiatives, right? Culture change. There's a readily available statistic out there. 66% of culture change initiatives in corporate America today fail,
Mhm.
right? So only 1/3 are successful. And there's one basic reason for that. Leadership, whoever set off the initiative, has focused on the problem they think there is versus understanding the problem that is there. Invariably, they wind up changing the thing that wasn't a problem and ignoring what the problem is, right? So change initiatives will take multiple years if you're going to do them right. You got to stick with it, and it requires top-down tone change while empowering the people below to reach up, right? You got to reach together. But if you don't take the time to understand the situation, you're going to fail,
Mhm.
right? So, and I think when companies look at creating a culture change, especially around DEI initiatives, right? And we know that that's kind of got its own little tone at this point, right? But if you don't understand the culture in the company that you're in, don't hire someone from another company that doesn't know what the culture looks like at your company if unless you give them time to really dive in, but if you're expecting them to make change in a month or 3 months, you've already committed to failure, right? So we have to start with that investigation, get people to understand what's really at stake in this company,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's where a lot of people miss, especially with their DEI initiatives. And I think it's, having worked with quite a few DEI people, senior people in my career, it's one of the most frustrating aspects. They're brought in, they're asked to make a change on a very fast timeline. It doesn't work because people don't adapt that fast.
Right.
There's mixed messages from leadership and it fizzles out
Mm-hmm.
and people burn out, right? So, I mean, to what you're saying, it's like people need to commit to understanding the issue within their company. Do you have a large segment of really anti-trans people? What are you going to do about that? Is it that you have a segment of people who just have no idea because they probably don't interact with trans people, right?
Right.
Maybe you're one of those companies that has quite a large LGBTQ audience and has some good knowledge about trans people, right? So uh, definitely do your homework, understand the problem that you have on your hands today, and give it time and be committed for the long term. No culture changes overnight, no culture changes in a year, and there's going to be growing pains.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm a data person as well. Like they get the data, right? And that is
Mm-hmm,
huge because that is a big misstep, right? It's like, oh, I know I have a problem. I'm gonna say it's this, but then when you do a survey of the employees, it's actually over here. It's completely different than what you
mm-hmm,
expected. And I think getting that temperature of just where are employees at with trans folks? Like what is like what do they think? Like literally, what do they think about trans people? And
mm-hmm,
how honest can you get people to be? And like you said, okay, this is where people are at, but how does that show up in the workplace too? Like, what's the data on that? Like, okay, this is how they
mm-hmm,
feel. What are they doing in response to how they feel, right? Like currently, what does that look like? And addressing all that. And it takes years. And I think that's
mm-hmm,
the other thing. They want also, I think it's funny they bring in like someone outside the culture, but then on the margins already and like want them to work so fast, figure this out,
mm-hmm.
change, do the thing. And it's like, no, like this is work. And also I'm a part of this community. So you're gonna need to like slow down, you know,
Yes.
and I love what you said about the empowering folks, to speak up, reach up as well. I think that's huge. Like when leadership is like, oh, I hear you're having this experience. I validate that. What can we do? Why did that show up this way in my workplace? How can I change that? And
Mm-hmm,
oftentimes it's, I think, invalidated. I've shared experiences with CEOs in the workplace, and I was like, well, they're trying. And I'm like, well, they're not trying hard enough. And this is how it's affecting me.
yeah.
Like, sorry, or we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to make people uncomfortable. I'm like, well, I'm uncomfortable. So now's the time to change, friend.
That's such a great point. And I hear that so often. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. Well, I'm
Yeah.
uncomfortable. I'm experiencing all kinds of things in the workplace. I am uncomfortable. Why
Yeah.
is that okay? Because there's just a few of me.
Right.
That should actually be easier to fix,
Yeah. Right.
frankly,
Right.
right? I want to come back to something that you said earlier, sort of off the cuff, and that's transition plans. And I know most companies probably don't have a transition plan until they need one,
Mhm.
right? Because why would you make one unless you're just really forward thinking or you have a diverse group, so at some point it's going to happen. Um, what are your thoughts on a good transition plan?
So I have never seen a good one, and I've never
Oh,
experienced a good one. So I mean, personally, from my like personal perspective, I would have liked a lot more guidance about, okay, you want to do this thing. Here's a trusted person you can reach out to in
yeah.
HR or whatever. That's the
Hmm.
first step. It's just like, who's my trusted person? And then I can have the conversation like what does this look like. And to be honest with you, when I think about it, it really depends on the workplace and the industry, right? Like some jobs I was so internal and I didn't deal with clients, I only dealt with my coworkers. And other jobs I was both internal and external. So then what does
Hmm.
that look like? And I think that first step though, that's what I wish I had, is just somebody in an HR role that I knew would be private about it and where I wanted them to be, and public about it where I wanted them to be, and guide me through the systems too that need to be changed, and how this would all roll out. That's how I see like a generic,
Yeah.
good policy. But yeah, I've had a few companies say they have one, but then they didn't like show, they didn't ask further. I
You didn't
just,
see it. You didn't
yeah,
get to approve it,
yeah,
sign it
they're like,
off.
let me see this. But yeah, I've never been at a company and experienced one. It's kind of like, oh, okay, you're doing this, like, it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm doing this.
Yeah, I've seen a few. I think they're probably all lacking, right? Because I mean, for I think the reason that I named earlier, they're usually making it out of necessity, someone going through it. So their transition plan seems to support, probably, if we're all honest, really was to support that person. And I'm not that person,
Mhm.
right? I'm in a different
Yeah,
position. Maybe I'm in a different part of the company. Maybe
right.
I'm a higher, or maybe I'm lower, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe I more naturally pass, or maybe I don't. I don't know, right? So transition plans, I think, are very valuable. Every company should be making one. If you have trans associates, ask them to take a look, or bring in a consultant like Leo to help you frame that up. Because I think what happens a lot of the time is there's not good guidance, and
Right,
someone who is transitioning in the workplace is already going through a lot with
right.
transition. Maybe they've already started and they're just finally letting you know. That was my case,
Yeah, same.
right? It was really more about like getting people to know me, not how do I have permission and
Right.
know what steps to take, right? Um, but make sure you have guidelines for communication, for how that person should be treated and handled. And I love what you said. Reach out to your HR, whoever your local HR person is. Hopefully, you have one. They should be able to keep that secret with you and guide you through the process of what your coming out at work would be with
Mhm.
some guidance. And I would definitely encourage people to make sure someone in leadership is a part of that conversation. Tone setting is huge,
Mhm.
right? If you can get that VP or whatever, I don't care what position you are in the bank, if you can get that HR person to get you to that person who's willing to say, this is how we treat Erica as of
Mhm.
today.
Mhm.
These are her pronouns,
Right.
right? That sets a big tone. And as you called out, with Gen Z, like this is going to become more and more common. Companies need to really think this through. But if they bring in people like you to help them figure that out, it's going to be a better, other than what was really a band-aid for one person that now is
Right.
applied to maybe 5 or 10 or 15,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And that's just people who are maybe at the either
Right.
side of the trans binary. What about non-binary people, right? And I know quite a few non-binary people really struggle because there's just lack of understanding. There's lack of uh, that person's responsible for training everyone around them on pronouns,
Yes.
and that they may dress femme one day and masculine the next day and gender neutral the day after that. They may have medical care or not.
Right.
And I think a final step that needs to be included in all those plans is, what does our insurance look like?
Yeah.
Right? If you're going to medically transition, insurance becomes a part of the process.
Yes.
And I know some companies do a really good job advocating and some don't. They've never given it a single ounce of a consideration. So if you don't have a transition plan and you know that you have trans and non-binary employees, go get one,
Yeah, time to get one.
right?
I think when you're talking, what I'm thinking is it's got to be clear but flexible, right? To your point, like, but
Mm-hmm.
depending on your position, depending on are you internal and external, are and so like clearly outlined for the person about what do I do first? Like, how do I handle this?
Yeah.
And then the company has the flexibility to say, okay, this person's in this position, this is what this looks like. So yeah, I think, like we were saying earlier, Gen Z, to your point, is going to require a lot of transition plans,
Mm-hmm.
and it isn't great to be reactive. Obviously, I mean, employees that are thinking about this aren't going to come out quickly or easily if they don't think you have a plan in place, right? So it's
Yeah.
better to have the plan in place than to just react to an employee coming out.
Yes. Uh, totally. It also will save you some liability,
Yeah.
companies, if you have a plan. You follow that plan, and
Right.
if your goal is to take care of that person, you're going to do okay, right? um Another question for you, but then I forgot it. Dang it. I guess let's talk about from here, right? We've talked about some equity and how to get this going, how to, you got to get leadership involved, consider it a culture change and give it time, let it marinate, really do your homework and understand. How do you feel about leveraging the people within your company that are part of the community, right? I know and I'm asking this because it's a little bit of a loaded question, right? Many of us, this is the side of our desk job. We don't get paid extra to do this work,
Right.
to build communities, to drive programming, to create effectively a community where people feel seen and welcome, right?
Mhm.
Despite what's happening in their local part of the company, right? How do we take care of the employees that do this work?
Yeah, that is something one that gets brought up. Like sometimes I'll get asked to speak and they're like, oh, we have this other trans employee. We're going to see if they'll be on the panel with you. And I'm like, are you compensating them extra? Because
Mm-hmm.
like I know you're compensating me because I'm not a part of your company. And
Right.
so when I was in a corporate setting, I felt like it was so much. We had a really high billable rate. Some of our employees were at like 88% billable. So like, 40
Wow.
hours. Yeah, it was crazy. And I was not at that high because I was a studio manager. So I had to like, manage people, which is not billable.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, this is near impossible to do this other work, like
Mm-hmm.
because it is work. And I shouldn't put air quotes, it's work
Mm-hmm.
but they make it seem like work, right? Like it's not really a part of work. And I just felt like there's got to be additional compensation. And I think that also though speaks to the larger conversation about people leave places to get higher, pay, right? Like you don't
Mm-hmm.
compensate employees that you already have in the way that you would if you hired someone in. And it's like that's
Mm-hmm.
to me bad practice. Like it's not good. And I think that similar thing happens with folks within a company doing all this DEI work not as a part of their role. It's not a part of their job description. It's something they've taken on. And I definitely think when you ask for people to speak to your whole company within the company, they should be compensated as you would if you brought a speaker in. And you have likely have a training budget if you're big enough. Pull from the training budget. They should get some of it because that's personal, and you're standing up in front of your coworkers or virtually in front of your coworkers, sharing a really private part of yourself in order to help shift that culture change.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. And I do think it has a lot of impact when someone within a company shares. And, when you're with a company and those are your coworkers and you see one of your coworkers coming out and transitioning, you're like, oh, that does give you pause. If I come in as a stranger, it has less of an impact. So I think there is a lot of value when
Mm-hmm.
employees do that and they're not rewarded in the same amount of value with compensation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It should be part of, you have a budget for it if you're bringing someone in. Like Leo
Yeah.
doesn't come and talk to you for free.
Right.
I wouldn't come and talk to you for free if I'm giving you the benefit of my knowledge and my education. Your employees inside should be treated the same way. They have expertise in something that's not part of their job, and you're asking them to teach the whole company,
Mhm.
right? And there's quite a few ways to think about how you can do that. And I'll leave that up to companies to sort that out. But at the very least, those people should be getting opportunities to go out and learn more, going to conferences if they want, being compensated in quite a few ways. There's ways to do it. But I also always like to call out, just because someone is trans or queer or however they identify doesn't mean you can force them to be part of your DEI squad, right? That's something they need to step into, because not everybody feels either comfortable or feels that they should reveal themselves or feel safe. I feel very comfortable talking about who I am. It's been my whole career to talk about, just to talk in front of people. So it's natural, right? I don't mind that because I know revealing myself, being vulnerable helps other people out. Not everybody feels like me. And so don't put someone in that position without them being willing to do it on their own. Don't put pressure on them, because you don't know what's going to happen when they go back to the rest of their job,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and I would even say, even if someone like us, like we have our job, but then we do this on the side, right? We speak and we get paid to speak. I would say even within like I'm in higher ed now, I've been asked to do things, and don't assume just because I do it over here, I want to do it in my
Yeah.
workplace as well,
Mm-hmm.
because one, they're not compensating me, but two, I might not feel might not feel that comfortable in front of colleagues sharing the things I would share in front of strangers that I'm not going to see again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's also that. Like I think sometimes people are like, "Oh, Leo's public, so Leo will do this. Hey, Leo, will you do that?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I won't do
No.
that. Sorry."
Mm-mm. Yeah, I've definitely gone through that a couple of times myself, where I'm like, I'm gonna take a break because I'm busy already with the things that I'm doing. I'm not really gonna show up for the rest of the company again.
Yeah.
Give someone else that opportunity, right? Don't just assume.
Yeah.
Okay, with the last few minutes we have left, right? I think this is an important one that people are kind of craving for, particularly trans people. I think many of us transition, and maybe through work is, how do you make friends? How do you meet people? And sometimes it's through work, right? Sometimes you're part of online communities and you get to meet people, but what I've noticed is that where trans people tend to be thriving more at work is when there's a community at work. And typically there might not be enough trans people to build a community, but if you take a look at the rest of the LGBTQIA plus community, there's probably enough individuals there. So what can companies do to foster an environment where we can come together and commune even while on the job?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think employee resource groups are great for that, right? It goes back to though framing it more socially and less like we're going to get this work done, we're going to change the
Yeah.
culture.
Hmm.
So like having like happy hours or, even if it's virtual, that's something I've worked for a lot of companies, even pre-COVID, where I was all virtual, we were all virtual. And I didn't mind like having like a one-on-one, like little coffee date with people, and
Hmm.
just connecting that way. We had at the company where the CEO didn't want to make people uncomfortable. We had a little Yammer group that was for the queer employees. So just we had
Hmm.
our little social network that we like you could opt in, which was really
Hmm.
great because you don't
Hmm.
know, like sometimes you're like, are they gay? Like, and then you're just like waiting for them to reveal like
Right. Yeah. You
what
never
was the
know.
partner's pronoun again? Like,
Hmm.
so I just feel like you're also kind of just like trying to figure out. And this way, if you have like some sort of a lot of companies, I feel like have like, teams or some sort of social spot that if you can create a group that people can opt into so that they can be like, oh yeah, here's all these gay people and my or queer people
Right.
in my company. This is awesome. Um, I think that's really a great way to do it as well. I know I have struggled in higher ed. It's funny because we're so segregated, really. It's like almost like being a freelancer when you're in higher ed because you teach your
Hmm.
classes, you don't really see each other. And so I'm just like, where are all the gay people? So there's actually an affinity group called Ball Pride, and we all meet virtually. Even though we're
Hmm.
on campus, we just usually meet virtually, and it's really
Right.
nice. And they like walked in Pride together, and
Hmm.
so I think yeah, opt in things are awesome. It's just like making them public and aware, making everybody aware that they exist.
Yeah. Excellent example. Well, Leo, it has been an absolute pleasure to actually get to talk to you and not just email you. But to have you on our little growing podcast here, we're so excited to have you be a part of it with us tonight. Any parting words for us?
Um, that's a hard one. Trans people are awesome employees. Like I said, we are. We're motivated. We're hardworking. I honestly have never worked with a trans person that I wasn't like impressed. Like we're just super impressive, super smart, self-aware, gorgeous. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna follow on that. We're amazing people. If you want to find someone who knows something about resiliency, someone who knows something about authenticity, putting their real selves forward, and vulnerability. I mean, come on, who puts that more on the table than trans people? Those are amazing people. I don't think I have ever met a trans person that I didn't instantly love because I was like, you were getting it done. So yes, that's just one of many reasons we're valuable. All right, well, that's it. That was episode 14. I think maybe the next one, episode 15, is going to be another trans joy episode with me. Leo, you're invited if you want to come.
Yes,
And we
next
will
week is
see
Trans Joy.
trans joy. So we will see you all then. Thanks for hanging out with us on the Transcending Humanity podcast. Listen to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts. We're on YouTube. Leo, anything you would like to plug before I sign off?
No, just follow me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with other trans folks and just people in general. Yeah.
Go follow Leo. He is awesome on LinkedIn. Thanks, everybody. Bye. We'll see you next time.